Chapter 35. A new life has been born, so let's adjust our living environment. The room that Zadiris had prepared for Bilda's childbirth was one of the countless rooms in the ruins of Talosheim. The room had been cleaned, and a rug made of the soft fur from a needle wolf's belly had been laid out on the floor, and Bilda was lying on top of it. First, sterilization. Bilda, are you alright? Vandalyu. There were 3 other ghoul women in the room other than Bilda. They were likely women who had experienced childbirth before, acting as midwives. Vivan. Bilda. Probably due to the pains of labor, Bilda's breathing was rough, and there was sweat on her forehead as she realized that Vandalyu was there and reached a hand out towards him. Vandalyu took that small hand that was still bigger than his own, and she gave his hand a squeeze. I am going to do my best and give birth to a healthy baby, okay? Bilda. What was a man supposed to say in response to this? This was a difficult question to answer in Vandalyu's position. He was aware of his own expressionlessness and flat tone of voice, so he thought he might come off as cold if he just said, "Do your best." So he hesitated. Trying to sound as reassuring as possible, he said, "It's all right, I'm here with you, so just relax." Vandalyu. Vandalyu didn't have a doctor's license, nor had he ever witnessed childbirth before, so he didn't know what exactly was all right or on what grounds Bilda could relax, but encouraging her was the top priority right now. In fact, his expressionlessness was convenient in situations like this. His lack of confidence didn't show on his face. Okay, Bilda. It seemed that Vandalyu had succeeded in encouraging her. She definitely seemed to be in pain, but she still smiled. When Vandalyu thought about the fact that had made her smile, the pain of her claws digging into his right hand seemed to be a trivial matter. They pierced his skin. But he could see a faint shadow of death on her face. Control your breathing. Short breaths in, long breaths out. Midwife. Check your status if you can. Has your vitality dropped? Midwife. I will make sure to deliver your baby. Rest assured. Zadiris. Looking at everyone else, Vandalyu realized that Bilda wasn't showing any strangeness or visible signs of her condition worsening. She showed no signs of being ill, and there shouldn't have been anything abnormal with the baby either. I'm going to examine you a little, okay? Vandalyu. But Vandalyu could definitely see the shadow of death, so he used spirit form transformation to transform his unoccupied left arm into spirit form and placed it inside Bilda's abdomen. And then he found that the umbilical cord had wrapped itself around the baby's neck. At this rate, the baby would be strangled. I'm glad Zadiris called me over here. Vandalyu. Thinking this, he loosened the umbilical cord from around the baby's neck, though it would have been easier to do it with his right hand. How is everything, boy? Zadiris. It's fine, I've resolved it. Vandalyu. The bones of Vandalyu's right hand were creaking and Bilda's claws had dug into it, so that her paralyzing venom was entering, but there was now no problem with the mother or the child. All right, the rest is up to your effort, Bilda. Zadiris. After that, just as Zadiris said, the childbirth continued with Bilda's efforts, while Vandalyu offered her encouragement while having his right hand squeezed. It took 6 hours for the child to be born, and Vandalyu learned just how great the mothers of the world were. A gray-brown baby with a wrinkled face. She was the first new ghoul born into the ghoul community in a long time. Look, it's a girl. I can't give your whole name to her, Vandalyu, but is it all right if I borrow half of it? Bilda. Bilda was holding her child, looking visibly exhausted but incredibly happy. Vandalyu was fine with it, but would the child's real father not mind? Bilda looked so happy that Vandalyu was hesitant to ask. I don't mind. Vandalyu. And so this was the reply he gave. Vandalyu would ask about this later to learn that newborn ghouls were generally named by their mothers, or their names would be decided after consulting with the chief of the tribe. Since Bilda was the mother, nobody would say anything about her decision to give her child half of Vandalyu's name. Will you hold her? Bilda. With pleasure. Vandalyu. Now he took the peacefully sleeping baby with both arms. The bone fractures of his right hand still hadn't healed, and it still didn't move very well after having paralyzing venom-secreting claws piercing it for hours on end. So he took the baby with his left arm and placed her on top of his knees. She's light and very warm. Vandalyu. The baby's body felt very light to Vandalyu. But this baby would grow up and live for 300 years. As this thought occurred to him, he got a sense of how mysterious life was. The birth of a new life was an emotionally moving event. Vandalyu felt this for the first time in his 3 lifetimes. When he had lived on Earth, even when watching that kind of documentary that told him this is how a new life is born, his only reaction to that was, After all, he was just watching a complete stranger on a screen, or the birth of an animal, so he hadn't felt emotionally moved at all. But he had experienced death twice, including the time after he became an undead, 3 times. And now that he was trying to bring Darshia back to life, he could really feel the emotion of this event. He decided to do everything he could to protect this child. He wasn't the child's father, but he was the Ghoul King after all. And so I'm postponing my trip to the dungeons. Vandalyu, Borkus and Vigoro made lonely-looking faces when Vandalyu told them this, but they understood that it couldn't be helped. The remaining 9 women would give birth one by one in the near future. If an unexpected situation arose while Vandalyu was in a devil's nest or dungeon, he wouldn't be able to deal with it. It's been so long since I've heard a baby crying. Vigoro, you can take your time to calm down first, but make sure you show the baby to us as well. Borkus, for a new life to be born in these ruins that were merely waiting to turn into dust, this is a truly happy event. Nwaza, how great, now we can have some drinks. Titan, if there's any alcohol to be had. Titan, there is, though it's not very tasty. Titan, for Vigoro, and the other ghouls who had been troubled by their problem of low fertility, it was clearly a happy event, but even Borkus and the other undead titans were truly genuinely happy to see the birth of this baby. Incidentally, one might have questioned whether it would be hygienic to allow the baby near the undead, but it wasn't a problem. Vandalyu had already cast the sterilization, bug killer, deodorization, and preservation spells on all of the undead titans. Once a drain system was established, Talosheim would become a fortress city as hygienic as any city of the Mid-Empire. There were relatively few people living in the city considering its size, so it would never lose the feeling of being a ghost town, however. Also, I want to strengthen Talosheim's defenses and use alchemy to make the magic item that will increase the ghoul's fertility. I'll leave the adventures and training for in between those. Vandalyu, those dedicated to the path of being a warrior or a mage might have scolded him for his lack of dedication, but nobody here scolded Vandalyu. All right, we'll just decide on the order we'll do things here. Vigoro, this is perfect. Nobody's gone into the dungeons for 200 years, so who knows what they'll be like inside. The number of monsters will probably have increased, so I'll thin them out for you. Borkus, it could be that they have been abandoned for so long that new, unknown levels have appeared in them. What will we do about the unarmed fighting lessons? For now, I suppose we'll go over the basics. Bajia, translator's note, hand-to-hand, was bothering me too much, so I've changed this to unarmed, in this chapter and all previous chapters. My lord, in that case, I shall increase my level and work hard to catch up to my companions. Bone Man, we'll be taking this time to learn our skills as well. Child, in this moment, Vandalyu realized once again just how much kindness he was surrounded by in this 3rd lifetime of his. The first thing to do was to create the magic items to fix the ghoul's fertility problem. Strengthening Talosheim's defenses would have to be done after the forest devil's nest was completely removed from the city, otherwise they would be up to their necks in raptors and needle wolves. Holy Sun, please give us a few more days. So he was told. It seemed that the problem was indeed the number of monsters, not their strength. Though the needle wolves weren't problematic, the raptors were intelligent enough to run away if they knew they couldn't win a fight, so exterminating them was likely very difficult. I am thinking of making 2 kinds of magic items. Vandalyu, one to make the sperm and egg cells survive longer, and the other to prevent fetuses from dying before they reach a certain size, if I recall. Creating magic items with both functions would be difficult after all. Zadiris, in the building next to the temporary maternity room, Vandalyu was discussing the creation of the magic items with Zadiris, Teria, Bajia, and several other ghoul women. Regarding that, I'm thinking of making the magic item that makes the sperm and egg cells survive longer something that is easy to put on and take off. Vandalyu, indeed, if it were something that stayed on permanently, we would produce children endlessly. Teria, you're right, it'll be hard for everyone's habits to suddenly change. Bajia, up until now, ghouls had experienced difficulties in getting pregnant, and even if they did, most of their children were not born successfully. Because of this, they had no marriage system, and it was natural for their society to do their utmost to try and create children. Even after Bilda and the others became pregnant, they hadn't shown any signs of holding back. Even if Vandalyu were to create the magic items, they wouldn't suddenly say, "All right, let's do proper family planning from now on." There were no convenient contraceptive devices or pills like on Earth, so that would make this only more difficult. Well, there wouldn't be problems in having a large number of children for a while. In fact, it would be a good thing. Talosheim still had plenty of space, and there was a near-endless supply of food. However, reproducing to the point of filling up all of the land would be a problem. Unlike Braga and the other monster children, ghouls did not age to maturity in the span of a single year. There will definitely be problems. Having one child is already a handful, but having 2 or 3 children at once. Teria! And there are many who are raising a child for the first time, including Bilda. Zadiris. There were no nurseries like on Earth, nor were there books, television programs, or the internet to refer to in order to learn how to raise a child. As Teria and Zadiris had experienced raising children before, they were concerned that there would be mothers who would suffer from maternity-related anxiety. Well, that didn't necessarily mean that having only one child would prevent maternity-related anxiety, however. So then I think it would be best to explain about contraception while I make the magic items. Vandalyu, you're right. Unlike humans, our lifespans are long. It's good for us to have many children, but we should be fine having a child once every 5 or 10 years. Bajia. For humans, especially for those living in farming communities, there would be circumstances where they wouldn't have the luxury of spacing out their children because it was a lot of work to raise them, and they probably didn't understand the concept of family planning anyway. Because medical technology was not well developed, there would be a strong notion that they should have as many children as possible while they were still young and healthy. But as Bajia said, ghouls had long lifespans, so it would be easy to convince the ghouls to adopt this policy. Humans would have opposed this strongly, however. But can the men hold themselves back? I think once every 5 or 10 years is impossible. Bajia. That is why it will be an accessory that can be put on and taken off. It can be put on only when wishing to have children. Teria. It would be a reverse contraception device. So what kind of accessory will you make it? Bajia. Right now, I'm thinking of making it a pendant or a band that goes around the thigh. Vandalyu. The shape and part of the body that the magic item would be worn on was very important. These factors would affect the difficulty of creating the item with alchemy, the materials required, and the strength of its effect when completed. For example, if there were a magic item that allowed one to walk on air as if it were the ground, would it not be likely that most people would expect such a magic item to be a pair of shoes? At the very least, nobody would think it would be a pair of glasses. In contrast, if there were a magic item that allowed one to see through objects while it was worn, most people would expect it to be a pair of glasses, not shoes. In this way, certain shapes and where the magic item would be worn would make it easier to create the item and produce a stronger effect, depending on what kind of effect was desired. Something that granted physical strength would be a ring or armlet. Something that granted some kind of vision would be glasses, or, alternatively, a circlet. Something that let one run at high speeds would be shoes, or an anklet. Of course, magic items, such as socks that allowed one to see in the dark, apparently existed, but creating such items would require a high level in the alchemy skill and expensive materials. At present, there were more alchemical materials available than food. The reason for this was that anything that they obtained from hunting monsters, they had to use themselves. There was no adventurer's guild to take magic stones to, so Braga and the other monster children had been playing with them like marbles. However, Vandalyu, the only one who could create a death attribute magic item, had a skill level of 1 in alchemy. Creating a band that went around the thigh close to the abdomen or a pendant that would hang similarly close was the limit of his ability. He also had the option of making it a belt, but the ghouls didn't have a culture of wearing belts, so it might have made the use of the magic item unpopular. Vandalyu would find it difficult to create an item that would be worn even closer to the relevant body parts than that. So, are there any colors or designs that you like? Vandalyu had included Bajia and the other women in this discussion to ask them this. Since they would be the ones wearing it, it would be best to ask them for their preferences in color or shape. Because of its intended function, it would be constantly worn during intercourse after all. Let's see. Everyone likes white, black, silver and gold. Bajia. I don't think anyone likes seeing red unless it's in battle. Woman. I think everyone likes things that look like wings. Also hearts, maybe. Woman. Bajia. And the others offered their opinions on what ghoul women liked. Vandaliu had no confidence in his sense of fashion, so this was greatly helpful. Incidentally, in Lambda, the heart was apparently a symbol of the goddess Vita, as to be expected of the goddess of the life attribute. However, a black heart would be a bad omen, so perhaps silver would be better? For now, we shall try making some. Teria! I'm counting on you. Vandaliu! The ones actually making the objects would be Teria and the other ghoul craftswomen. Creating a magic item required the alchemy skill, but that was simply imbuing an object with magic. The object itself was generally made by another craftsman. There were some alchemists that did everything on their own, from gathering materials to creating the items themselves, but those were exceptionally unusual. So what will you do for the magic item that keeps the fetus alive? It would be problematic for this one to be something that can be easily taken off. Zadiris. Zadiris had been whispering. Gold and silver. Youngsters these days sure like their shiny things. But now she asked this question, and Vandalia replied, this is a little problematic. As Zadiris said, it would be better for this magic item to be difficult to remove. If it accidentally came off and was lost or the mother forgot to put it on and the baby died, it would be seriously problematic. But that didn't mean that it could be something put inside the body. The two of them nodded as they thought about this. How about a tattoo? Zadiris. A piercing after all? Vandaliu. Both. They both looked at each other after coming up with totally different answers. Boy, a piercing would be too far from the abdomen. A tattoo will not disappear, and it can be applied anywhere. Zadiris. The piercing wouldn't be on the ears, nose or lips, but on the belly button. As for tattoos, who would apply the tattoos to begin with? Vandaliu. It seemed that ghouls hadn't come up with the idea of piercing their belly buttons. And Vandaliu hadn't thought of the idea of making a magic item out of a tattoo engraved onto the body. And then after discussion, they settled on using belly button piercings. If we use tattoos, won't they become strangely distorted when the stomach expands? The baby would have grown big enough by the time that happens, but reapplying the tattoo every time you want to become pregnant wouldn't be an option. In that case, I think piercings are better. Bajia. And so Bastia's opinion was accepted. Incidentally, the idea that piercings were applied on the neck and above was something that not only ghouls, but the entirety of Lambda possessed. Belly button piercings would spread and become greatly popular, starting in Talosheim, but that would be a story set in the distant future. From then on, Vandaliu lived a lifestyle that was more lenient than usual, but still harsh on a 3-year-old boy. He would typically rest 1 day a week, and if one of the pregnant women went into labor on that day, he would still have to attend. He would take 3 hours rest the next day to compensate. With this as the basic rhythm of his lifestyle, he spent his time continuing to repair and maintain the city of Talosheim, as well as training in unarmed combat while waiting for Teria and the other craftswomen to create prototypes for the magic items. The repairing and maintenance were simple. Get up, join together, get out. Vandaliu. He just needed to use golem transmutation. The pieces of rubble on the ground would grow arms and legs to move, join together, change their shape, and return to their original form. Constructing a building from scratch would still be difficult, but fixing one that had crumbled a little was simple. Thanks to the carpentry skill, Vandaliu had a general idea of what he needed to do. In Lambda, apparently the same skill was used to build both pit dwellings for ghouls and stone houses for titans. Not only did Vandaliu repair the buildings, he also used the engineering skill to repair and maintain the roads and sewer system. Talosheim had no waterworks system, but it did have a sewer system. They used a water-purifying magic item to purify used water while gathering the waste in one spot to ferment and use as manure. Of course, since 200 years had passed, this system was unusable without some work being done on them. Vandaliu turned the ground surface into golems to expose the sewer pipes, turn those pipes into golems as well to repair the cracks and remove any blockages, and applied the anti-degradation spell that he had learned after his skills leveled up before putting the ground back. He supplied mana to the water-purifying magic items. He had Bone Man, and the other undead exterminate the unknown sludge-like monsters that had grown in the vats that were used for fermenting waste. With all of these completed, the sewer system finally became usable again. They would have to draw water to use from wells and waterways, but it was very convenient to simply be able to discard any used water. After being alive in Lambda for 3 years, Vandaloo realized just how great the sewer systems of Earth were. He was especially appreciative of this because he had been Japanese. After making everything usable again, he intended to have them maintained automatically by golems. Vandaloo was thoroughly taught the basics of unarmed combat by Bajia. Your physical strength is almost no different to an adult ghoul's, Van. Let's practice as if it were a real battle. Bajia. He learned numerous patterns, as well as how to defend and dodge with his body. Bajia swept his legs, kicked him, threw him around, stomped on him. He was surprisingly overwhelmed one-sidedly. Even though he wasn't using any magic, it made him doubt whether he really had the strength of an adult ghoul. You have an aptitude for this and you're sensitive to bloodthirst, but your attacks are forced and monotonous, Van. You'll become stronger if you move more quickly and use some feints. Also, you have to always predict your opponent's next movement. Bajia. Bajia knew that Vandaloo panicked when scolded harshly and that he disliked being taught in a spiritual way. So while she hadn't gone easy on him in the training, she made sure to speak in a gentle tone while teaching him. And so Vandaloo was able to take these lessons with composure. He had been completely reliant on magic for defense up until now, and his attacks had been monotonous in that he simply used his overwhelming amount of mana to push his way to victory. Some of this couldn't be helped because of how young his body was, and he himself thought that there was no other way. He had never even gotten into a fight as a Japanese person, and after that he had become a laboratory animal in origin who could do nothing but rampage around like a beast. He had been under the impression that unarmed fighting and martial arts were too distant for him to reach. But thanks to his father in this world, he apparently had surprisingly strong muscles. What's really amazing is how you don't close your eyes. I took 3 months to learn not to close my eyes even when my face was attacked, but you haven't been closing your eyes right from the beginning, Van. You have incredible talent. Bajia. Thank you. Vandaloo. His forehead and cheeks had been hit, though lightly, so his face was pinker than usual, but Vandaloo's eyes stayed open. Knowing that he could close his eyes and use spirit form transformation to see using his spirit form, eyes seemed to influence his instincts and reflexes. The pregnant women would go into labor every few days, and Vandaloo attended every single baby's delivery. Things like the umbilical cord wrapping around the baby's neck didn't happen every time. They proceeded normally, that is, with the usual struggles, drama and emotions that humans experienced, and the babies were born safely. Things seemed to proceed well for the ghouls after birth as well, including Bilda. This was likely to do with the fact that ghouls had more robust bodies than humans, and the fact that this place was half Devil's Nest. The veterans who had experienced childbirth before, like Sidiris and Teria, were teaching them various things regarding life after giving birth, so it seemed that things would go well. It was the middle of July when things became truly busy with the magic item creation process. Imbuing magic in the items that Teria had created turned out to be quite difficult. Repairing an entire castle wall would have been far easier than this. At this rate, making 3 magic items in a day is my limit. Ha! Vandaloo! Your skill is still level 1, is it not, boy? This is a sufficient pace. Zadiris, if you make them too fast, the pace at which I make the items will not be able to keep up. Making accessories is outside my area of expertise after all. Teria! There were roughly 600 ghouls needing these magic items. At this rate, it would take over 300 days to make magic items for everyone. However, not all of the ghouls wanted children right now, so there seemed to be no need to hurry. And by your calculations, you would be making magic items for Teria and I as well. Or could it be that this is your roundabout way of making a confession? Zadiris. Oh my, I mustn't. Even though I look young, I am over 260 years old. However, if Vansama wished for it, Teria! You shouldn't tease a 3-year-old boy. If you say such things too often, I'll really take you up on your words in a decade or 2. Vandaloo. The creation of the magic items continued with enjoyable conversations like these, using the powdered organs and magic stones of defeated monsters. Ah, the magic stone that Vandaloo just crushed Was it a noble orcs? And Vandalyu tried various things in his spare time. And the fish and fermentation. Since there were no soybeans, he tried making fish sauce from fish. He hadn't gone out of his way to invent fish sauce in origin, but he succeeded making it after 3 tries now. The fish sauce was smelly and a little harsh, but herbs could be added to make it lighter. Next, he tried using walnuts and acorns to make walnut miso and acorn miso, and found it a little difficult. He succeeded in fermenting it using magic, but he wasn't entirely satisfied with the resulting flavor. The researchers who squeezed the mana out of Vandalyu had tried using him to make miso before, so this was one of his strong points, but it was his first time making it from walnuts and acorns. It's not as tasty as it was said to be on Earth, I guess, but it contains the walnut's flavor and acorn's fragrance, so I suppose this is alright as it is? Vandalyu didn't know that the walnut miso on Earth didn't use salt and walnuts as a substitute for miso, but simply added walnuts to already made miso. However, he had made something with a flavor that he was content with, so he cast maturation on it to deepen its flavor and shared it with everyone. Also, wasabi and ginger were discovered in the partial devil's nest Talosheim, so they were quickly cultivated. Well, for ginger, it was just a matter of turning the areas where it grew into fields and occasionally applying fertilizer. This alone allowed them to harvest ginger every week. Devil's Nests were truly wonderful places. The cultivation of wasabi took some intervention. He released toxic components around the wasabi to prevent other plants from growing in its vicinity, but these components would affect the growth of the wasabi itself and prevent it from growing larger. And so, Vandalyu came up with the idea of imbuing stakes with a detoxification spell that neutralized the wasabi's toxic components in the area where the stakes were planted. It was quite a failure, but also something of a success. The ghouls and titans would have to go around the devil's nests and find new wasabi to use. Vandalyu also tried creating Jenga. All he needed to do was turn some lumber into wood golems and split them into pieces of the same size. It was even simpler than making boards and pieces for reversi. This fish sauce, could this be the legendary soy sauce? The sauce spoken of in legends, the one that the champion Zacher tried and failed to create. Nwaza, whatever it is, it's tasty. Borkus, soy sauce was more difficult to create than miso. Even the champion Zacher had difficulties in recreating it. He had apparently succeeded in recreating miso, but Bellwood had set the miso warehouses on fire before miso could become widespread. That would explain why almost nobody knew that miso existed. Bellwood didn't allow it. Ginger and wasabi had apparently been used in food from the beginning. But everyone was happy that it was cultivated and could be harvested reliably. And Jenga became a trending thing in Talosheim, just as Reversi had. No carpenters among the titans had become undead. So the ghouls and undead titans approached Vandalyu with monster meat and offered him a trade for Jenga pieces. Could it be that I could live a peaceful life just by making flavorings and toys? Vandalyu. The trading was primitive, but it seemed that life would become fulfilling for him. The first stage of magic item creation was completed, and around the time Talosheim had returned to its appearance of being a white fortress city, it was the end of summer in September, when the footsteps of autumn could be heard. Now then, I'll be going into the dungeon starting today. Vandalyu. And so Vandalyu was finally beginning his adventures to earn experience points. The levels of the alchemy, carpentry, engineering, and cooking skills have increased. A long dining table had been prepared in a dark, unknown location. A red fluid was poured into wine glasses and shared among those gathered here. They were dressed in elegant clothes that would sell for enough money for a normal family to live in luxury for a year and over-decorated with jewelry. One might think that this would be some banquet for noblemen, but the ones gathered here were not noblemen in the normal sense of the word. An air of elegance and nobility appeared to be drifting from them. The men and women here were beautiful, perhaps ephemeral in appearance. It was possible that everyone here possessed both profound beauty and intelligence. But in reality, they were cold-hearted, merciless, cruel demons who thirsted for blood. Now then, let us begin the meeting. The first topic of discussion is the aforementioned damper. Vampire, with his crimson eyes, sparkling with joy, the pure-breed vampire who led the discussion moistened his throat with the fresh blood that had been poured into his glass.